What's up, Zach here, and today I've got the all-new adidas D.O.N issue 6. Let's get into them. Now, to me, the D.O.N issue 5 was one of the more snappy and playable shoes all the way from basketball to pickleball to tennis, and so I was really keen to see what they did with the 6. Now, starting off in the uppers, the one thing about the uppers is they are ridiculously substantial. I mean, Adidas did not skimp on the volume of material they put on the upper. Now, number one, the outermost layer, you've got this netted meshing that is, you can see on the microscope there is a really nice woven TPU layer right underneath of there. It kind of interacts with that most kind of outer. On this one, it goes from pink to purple, but that most outer netting. But then underneath of that, you actually do get pretty significant padding that goes all the way into the tongue. That tongue has a pretty low gusset, but it does lock you in there pretty nice, and it is very padded as you go into the ankle collar. Same thing, just a lot of really broad padding, and you get that double heel counter padding, which is supposed to aid in decreased heel slippage. What I noticed is because there's so much reinforcing along the lace line, especially here in the ankle, the heel slippage was pretty noticeable. It took me about a half hour to break in this ankle collar. Once I did, it really went away to really minimal. So if you're gonna get these, I would say probably wear them around the house for a little bit, just break them in. That way the first time you put them on, you can really crank down on them and really kind of eliminate that heel slippage. Now, if you look at this thing on the breathability test, these things did heat up 126.2 degrees, which it is getting up there. And if you look at the breathability mapping of them, although fog does start eventually coming out of the distal forefoot, it takes a while. Most of it's coming out of the sides of the gusset of the tongue. There's just so many layers in this shoe in terms of the uppers that there's a lot of places to trap heat and moisture. Now, I've been playing in some very humid conditions, and although my feet did not feel super hot in these, I really could feel the moisture in these ones after, about an hour of playing in them. So I think if you bring a change of socks, it's fine. If you're not playing in a super humid gym, you're probably okay. But for those really, really hot, humid conditions, I probably would bring a change of socks just for, like I said, a little bit of that moisture retention. And on the upper durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper. Yeah, I mean, the burr does start to work through the drag guard. It kind of starts melding into that meshing. Thing is, if you're a real extreme everter or dragger, if you start working through that, that's going to start catching on grittier surfaces. On a more slick surface, like an indoor hardwood court, I think it should probably be okay. The one thing I will make mention of, though, in terms of durability is the lace line. Now, these outrigger lace eyelets, typically outrigger lace eyelets are not nearly as durable as integrated a lot of the times. And these ones, though, you see this little pink reinforcement on there. That's actually a little bit more of a stronger backed material on there. So these should last a little bit longer, and they are stitched in there pretty substantially. So as long as they hold, the stitching holds into that lace line, you should be okay. The last lace eyelet is also pretty far proximal. But the other thing in terms of durability, which I do like, is that there is this double layer of padding that goes all the way around the lace line. Now, that is nice for protecting your feet from getting trampled on. Now, this padding isn't super thick, and this is more plastic here on the more distal line, but it is just one more layer between you and somebody else's heel coming down. So it actually could, aid in a little bit of protection on your feet. So that was a nice little feature. I'm not sure if that's window dressing and that was its intended use, but it is kind of nice to have just a little bit more padding around some of the more vulnerable parts of your feet. The only thing I will say is because this more distal line is a little bit harder, if the joints of your toes line up with this in the wrong way, it's going to be a pretty long break-in to get that to sit right. It was fine for me, so I think as long as you get these true to size, you should be okay, because I think that's how this is measured. But like I said, in the fit section, we'll talk about that a little more, but just watch out for that. And getting into the midsole teardown, this one was pretty interesting. You've got a full bed of Light Strike, and then you've got a Light Strike Pro insert here on the metatarsal heads or the ball of your foot. Now, the shank in this thing is molded in the arch, and it does cross two zones. It goes from the rear foot all the way into the forefoot with these two little fingers that go into the forefoot. Now, I think that's great. Number one, it makes the shoe a lot more stable side to side. Thing is, if you look at the bounce height test, only 24 centimeters in the rear foot and only 30 in the forefoot. I mean, Light Strike Pro a lot of the times gets up into the 40s, like I've been to the mid 40s sometimes. The thing is, though, I don't know if I had shiny object syndrome when I first started reviewing Light Strike products a few years ago, or if it's kind of changed, but Light Strike to me recently has been a little bit more dull. It's just been a lighter foam, right? So it's light, provides some shock absorption, but to me it does not have a lot of snap. You can even see that with the Light Strike Pro over top of the Light Strike. The Light Strike almost kind of cancels out the benefits of the Light Strike Pro. So honestly, I think this would have been better being almost like Bounce Foam, right? Or Bounce Pro and then Light Strike Pro over top of it. Whereas the Light Strike, like I said, just seems to kind of deaden the shoe, even with that longer shank. I kind of could feel that on foot. Whereas these ones, yeah, I mean, just as a sneak peek into the fit section, yeah, I thought they were more comfortable than previous Dawn issue shoes. They definitely weren't as snappy, especially as snappy as the 5s, and that was a Light Strike shoe too. So, like I said, it's kind of weird what the Light Strike has been feeling like recently. I said it's not bad. It doesn't feel like a brick by any means. It definitely feels, you know, bottom light like Light Strike products do. And like I said, I think because of that shank, super stable in the midsole. Like I said, the shoe is incredibly sure-footed. It's just not as bouncy and snappy as I was expecting with a near full-length shank and a pretty big slab of Light Strike Pro. And getting into the outsole tread, this is a pretty simple radial pattern. It's broken up by a couple, you know, like boomerang cutouts in the shoe. But overall, you know, it is a pretty fine-tuned type traction. You look at it on the viewing box, you can kind of see, you know, just those lines of tread kind of moving and swaying, almost like lines of kelp in the water, right? Where the waves coming down and kind of swaying back and forth. If you look at it on the grip test ramp, they slip at 38 degrees, which is not a super tack shoe. I more found that just the construction of the shoe, more the midsole was giving, like I said, more of the sure-footedness. No, they weren't super tack shoes, but they definitely weren't super slippery shoes either. And they did not hold on to nearly as much dust as I thought they were going to. I thought these things were really going to be, you know, just because kind of these little grooves in there. But really, they were not. They're actually pretty easy to keep clean. So, like I said, in terms of a sure-footed shoe, especially in the outsole, yeah, I think they've got this in spades. If you look at this on the speed ratio, they only come in at a 1.85 and then a shank score of 0.3, very well earned. Brings that up to a 2.15. Honestly, I kind of think that may be underselling it just a tad because, like I said, they are so quick side to side and they're easy to kind of move around. They're so sure-footed and bottom light feeling. But in terms, like I said, snap, you know, like I said, that diving board effect, right? You know, that pop, that punch. I do think the Dawn issue 5 had a little bit more of that in there. Maybe the Dawn issue 5 isn't as durable over time, over months of use that these will be because that shank. And given enough time, that Light Strike Pro will start to kind of, you know, usurp, you know, just the setup in the Dawn issue 5. But to me, like I said, these weren't the snappiest of shoes. Like I said, they were much more sure-footed bottom lights that kind of, you could create the speed, you could kind of create, you know, the stopping power in them. The shoe just kind of gets out of your way. Look at these things on the outsole durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper. I mean, not even a millimeter of damage on this. And like I said, these are very narrow lines of tread. Typically, even with harder durometers, and this one is a harder durometer, comes in at 19.75. But typically, even with the harder durometer rubbers, the burr will still get through them because there's no, you know, there's no surface area to kind of share that friction. Whereas in these, very, very good. So although this type of traction is just not ideal for outdoor courts because there's just not enough surface area to grab into some of the grittier outdoor courts, you still can play with them on outdoor courts. That's the thing. I mean, especially in the forefoot, especially with the shank, there is enough protection under your foot. It's just that, like I said, I think the best tools of these and the sure-footedness of these, I think it just works better on an indoor hardwood or rubberized court. And getting into the fit of the 6s, this one was pretty interesting. Now, number one, it only has a 7-degree inflare, so they are pretty forgiving shoes in that department. They are a little bit straighter lasted. Now, next, they come in at 28.7 centimeter length, 9.6 centimeter width, and then they've got a toe box taper of actually 30 degrees, then a toe box width of 10.6 centimeters. So it's pretty forgiving in the metatarsals, right, the ball of your foot. And because it's not super inflared of a shoe, the taper is a little bit more. The one thing I noticed about these is I could feel my big toe on the side of them, but I couldn't feel my 5th toe. And usually when a shoe has a little bit more of a toe box taper, more of an inflare, you feel it on the 5th, not the 1st. Whereas in these ones, because they're straighter, you feel it on the 1st, not the 5th. Really, I really didn't have any issue with that. But like I said, because the inflare wasn't so much, and because the metatarsal width is pretty decent, and because the actual toe box width is actually pretty wide, you know, you really don't feel that toe box taper too much. It actually does make the shoe a little bit more forgiving getting up and down the court. I think honestly it kind of needs it for, you know, just the other profile of the shoe like we talked about in the speed section. I'd say a narrow and medium foot, I think you can go true to size on these. If you are really narrow, I think you probably can go down to half size on these, get a little bit of a better lockdown. A medium and 2, I think go true to size. A 4E, I think you can go up 1/2 size on these. I think going up any more than that might introduce some issues in terms of this little piece here on your metatarsal phalangeal joint. joints or the ball of your foot, those joints right there. Now, in terms of the snake bitten foot, you know, these felt fine for me on court, and I think for ball of foot pain, I think they're very good. For arch pain, I think they're outstanding just because, number one, yeah, I mean, the shank does come up here on the medial and lateral sides, so it does harness you. The thing is with that, though, is that the light strike in the rear foot is going to start to kind of compress more than the rest of the shoe will, so there's potential for a negative heel there, which means your heel sinks lower than the rest of your foot. So I'd say with an orthotic, I think they're fine for pretty much everything. That orthotic is just there to share the load, right? It's just to disperse the weight across a bigger surface area of the shoe, right? Because we got that orthotic in there. It's a little wider than your heel, so you're just more evenly compressing that foam. So that's, I think that stress shielding, I think is the biggest caveat in these. In terms of sure-footedness, like midfoot sprainers, ankle sprainers, you know, really, you know, hypermobile flat feet, I think these are great. Now remember, these two rails here on the medial and lateral side, they'll also hold an orthotic very straight and very centered in this shoe as well. So you're actually getting a couple benefits out of this. Now, number one, if you are somebody with a really wide midfoot or almost kind of like a little bit wider of a rear foot, that's going to be a little bit more of a break-in. I didn't notice it because my styloid process, that big bump on the side of your foot, actually came just a little bit further distal than that, and so I didn't really have any issues with it. I thought that thing was going to cramp me like crazy. It did not. But if you're someone with a little bit of a wider, more, you know, posterior midfoot to rear foot, that actually might annoy you. So I think it kind of depends on where the bulk in your foot is, where you're going to have issues. If it's more forward, like I said, I think my sizing recommendations kind of hold true. If you're really bulky in the rear foot, that's where I think you might have to start going up half sizes, and at that point, it just might be a mismatch for you. But getting into the all-important performance and playability of the D.O.N issue 6, the one thing I noticed in these is we were doing a lot of cutback drills with my coach, and I noticed as I was getting more and more tired, right, you know, your ball handling starts getting, you know, really, really suspect. And then typically with me, my footwork starts going too. And these ones, even though my legs were starting to fail, I wasn't slipping out. I could still find balance on these, which was really nice. Because I think the balance on these is really elite, especially when your legs are starting to get a little bit more tired. The bottom light feeling of these was really nice. Now, the fact that they weren't giving me a ton of spring back, I could definitely feel after a while, but I think if you've got a little bit more of a lively orthotic in there, that's going to help you out a little bit. So like I said, I think augmentation with these is the real win here. I will say I thought these were a little bit more comfortable than the D.O.N issue 5, but I thought the D.O.N issue 5 played a little bit more, like I said, snappy than these ones did. Like I said, I like where the line is going because they're putting more premium attachments into the shoe, which I really like. And like I said, for a sure-footed bottom light shoe that's invariably going to go on sale. I mean, you see all the D.O.N issue models, they end up, you know, on pretty steep discount after a while. You are getting a more premium shoe for a budget model price eventually once the prices start to come down. And like I said, I do think even right now, they are definitely worth the price that they're at right now for the right player. Something, like I said, wants a very sure-footed shoe, a bottom light feeling shoe, something that can, you know, put an orthotic in there to get just a little bit more performance out of it. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I think overall it's a nice addition to the line. Like I said, I'd like to see where the material changes are going in the line. But like I said, they're not going to be the greatest thing in the world going after layup after layup after layup, like we did with the GT Hustle 3 recently, where it was like, you know, you could just go up and down, up and down, up and down. Your legs wouldn't even feel it. Where, like I said, in these, a little bit more of a ground assault, trying to create a little bit more space. But remember, the GT Hustle 3, with its stability issues, you know, these things have that stability in spades. So it's all what shoe matches up to your individual foot. So, like I said, if you do want to see what I'm talking about with the Nike GT Hustle 3, if you want to see that shoe go under the knife, make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect, rubber, and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.